Hi, my name is Jesse Barnum with 360works. Today I'm going to be talking about 360works Web Services Manager, which will take your FileMaker scripts and publish them as XML Web Services. I'm not going to run through all of the features, but I'm going to start off with the installation process. You can see that it comes with these two FileMaker files, and there's also a PHP file that comes with it. So I'm going to go ahead and install this right now. The first thing to do is to upload the two FileMaker files to FileMaker Server. I'm creating a subfolder here, which I don't need to do, but just to keep it nice and organized, I'm going to do that. I'm going to select my two FileMaker files, upload those through the FileMaker admin tool. And so that's the first part of installation. Now I need to open that file up in FileMaker Client. It's going to prompt me for a username and password when I first connect. The username is user, and the password is pass, P-A-S-S. The next thing that's going to happen is it's going to require me to change that password to something new. I'm just picking new pass here. I'm hoping that you'll pick something a little more secure than that. And so this is now up and running. The next step for me to do is to edit this PHP file. I need to modify it and change the word pass to whatever the new password is that I picked. So I'm going to put new pass there. I'll then put that into my document, into my web server document root. On the Macintosh, this is Library Web Server Documents. So I'm going to copy the file into there. And I'm actually now done with the installation process. So let's talk about these different tabs. Operations. An operation in web services terminology is pretty much similar to a script in FileMaker. Every operation will trigger one script in FileMaker. Services are collections of operations, so you can have multiple services. Each service can contain multiple operations. The only one that's enabled in this example is the example service, which contains three very simple web services. There's WSDLs. A WSDL is a web services description language, and a WSDL is what's necessary in order to call a web service. The WSDL gets automatically generated by that PHP file that we dropped in. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a Java application that we created to trigger these web services. I'm going to call the add2number service. I'm going to pass in the parameters. I'm going to hit submit. And just like that, we just called an XML web service that communicated with FileMaker Pro, triggered a script in FileMaker that added those two numbers, and returned back an XML result with the result of those two numbers. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what that script looks like. So let's jump over to there. So here's the add2numbers operation that we just called. You can see the name there. Here's the file that it exists in, which is WSM examples. It's going to be called in the example layout, and it's going to call the add2numbers script. It's set to return the first record only because it's not a list of results, and it takes two parameters, addend1 and addend2, which are both numbers. You can see that it's set to just run the script as guest, so it's not going to require a username and password from the XML client, and it's a part of the example service web service. So let's open up that WSM example files that contains the script. Here's the example layout that we're looking at right here. You can see it has one field on it called output value. Whatever we set that output value to in our script is going to be returned as the result of the web service. So let's go in and actually look at the script. It starts off with just some comments, and then we get to the lines where we set some variables with the script parameters. And you can see the script parameters get passed in as a return separated list. So this get value, get script parameter, semicolon 1, that's just saying get the first line of the script parameter and store it in addend1, and then do the same thing with addend2. Then add those two together, set the output value from that, and that's our entire script. So we're using just regular FileMaker scripting that we're all familiar with in order to create a found set that has these fields set, and that will be returned as the result of this web service. So just to demonstrate this one more time, now we kind of know a little bit better what's happening. When I submit it this time, it's passing that 8 and that 4 in as FileMaker parameters, and then FileMaker is passing back 12 as the result from adding those two numbers together. Next, I'd like to do something a little bit more useful. I'm going to use the Business Productivity Toolkit that comes with FileMaker, and I'm going to set up the inventory database that comes with that to publish a list of our inventory. This could be really useful in like a B2B scenario where we have clients that want to get real-time access to our list of products that we have so that they can integrate that into maybe their their in-house purchasing system. So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm creating a new layout. I've called it Inventory Short. I'm selecting which fields are relevant to be on this Inventory Short field. And this step is important because whatever layout I set is going to be the result of my web service. So I only want to put the fields that I would like to return as the results of the web service. So I took off cost there because cost is not something I want to show the client. I'll leave price, but not cost. We don't care what it looks like, so I'll just leave it plain and ugly. And here's what it looks like. We've got 4 records, and that's the fields. Now I'm going to go into Web Services Manager, and I'm going to set up a web service that's going to get all the records from that inventory database. I'm going to get a list of all the available files. I'm going to select inventory. That's the file that has the script that I'm going to be calling, or the table that I'm going to be accessing. I add that file to my list of available files. I'm going to create a new operation in that file. I can name it anything that I want. I'm going to pick the layout name as Inventory Short that we just created. I don't need to pick a script because we just want to show all the records. If I had triggered a script, then it would perform whatever scripting command that I specify. Here's where you can put documentation in, and this will be put in the WSDL file and made available to the clients. I'm going to pick run script as guest in this case. Guest is set to only have read-only access. You know, that's something that we might not do in a real application, but it makes it simple to do our demonstration here. I've added it to the example service so that it'll be available as part of that collection of operations. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to Adobe Flash. Adobe Flash has built-in services to interact with XML Web Services, and it's nice for demo purposes because it's very graphical and doesn't require any code. You could use other software development tools like Java, .NET, Ruby, PHP. Though all of these things can interact with web services, I've only picked Flash here because it requires no code and because it's easy to create a GUI interface with Flash. You can see that Flash has read the WSDL. It knows the methods that are in it. It knows the things that are going to be returned. It even grabbed that documentation that we created. And now all that's left to do is just set up the buttons to trigger that script. I'm going to create a data grid that's going to contain our result list. And after I resize this, I'm just going to bind up these things so that the button calls the web service and the data grid will be bound to the results of the web service. I'm naming this web service. I'm going to go into my Flash behaviors. I'm going to add a trigger data source action. It's going to trigger this web service that we just created. I'm going to switch to my data grid. I'm going to go to bindings. The data grid has one important binding, which is the data provider. And the data provider, I'm just going to connect that to the array of results from the web services. Let's go ahead and test this example. It creates a Swift file, get items, that calls the web service and returns the results there. So this is now just demonstrated from Flash, calling into a FileMaker Pro database, getting the results as XML, and displaying them in a Flash user interface. A very important point to note here is that this could have been done by anybody familiar with Flash. There was no knowledge of FileMaker at all required to do this. And this goes across any sort of operating system or programming language that you're using. It's not necessary to understand FileMaker at all because Web Services is an industry standard specification. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this demo. I'm Jesse from 360 Works.